Hi, I'm going to talk to you about how to sew today. And the way that a sewing machine works is essentially there's a top thread and a bottom thread. So if you look at the machine, you see that there's a thread coming out of the bottom and a thread coming out at the top. And what that does is they get joined together. So I'm going to pull this apart. You want to zoom in?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that there's a top thread and a bottom thread sort of forming a loop. And on this edge, I did not go back and reverse and lock the stitches so I can pull them apart. I could even, if I pick at them, I can pull them apart even more. On this side, I did a quick back stitch and locked this stitch, so it's gonna stay in place better on that end. But I'm just gonna describe for you on a rather typical machine how you would go about sewing. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna do, typically in sewing, you have two thicknesses of fabric, so you've either got two edges joined together or you've folded it in some way. And then if you come closer, there are lines along the side that are indicators. So every time you sew, there will typically be a seam allowance. So if you're doing 5/8 inch seam allowances, let me find my tool for that. Okay, so if we look, you can zoom in on this one. So if we're trying to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, that first line would be the distance from the needle to the edge. If we're doing 5/8, which is pretty typical in clothing patterns, that would be the second line. And so you would just kind of line your fabric up with the appropriate seam allowance, 1/2 inch, 5/8 inch, and then you clamp it down. There's a lever on the back that you clamp down, so you secure your material. And then it's going to advance using something called a feed dog. So this bit, I'm going to take off the presser foot so you can see, this is called a feed dog, and it sort of goes, here, I'll gently do it for you. It goes back, it's kind of waving the material back to feed it into the sewing machine. So, and this is called a presser foot, and there are different styles for different kinds of things like zippers or other rolled hems, stuff like that, but we're going to stick with just a basic one for today. So you have your fabric folded over onto itself, you've picked your seam allowance, you clamp it down, and then I think it's a good practice to kind of hold those two threads back there so they don't get pulled up in the machine. And then we're going to do just a typical straight stitch. The length, if you want to come over here, of this stitch is 4. I'm not really sure for what, if that's 1/4 of an inch, I don't really know, but 4 is bigger than 3 and bigger than 2, so that's the biggest my machine will do. And then the width of the stitch, which you see right here, is 0. So a zigzag would have some width to it, a straight stitch has no width to it. So we're going to stay 0 width, 4 length, and then this is our tension, it's sort of how tight the thread is. You can see that there's sort of an indicator between 3 and 5. We're keeping it right in the middle at 4. So we've got our material clamped, we've got our seam allowance chosen, we're going to hold those two threads and we're going to push the pedal and go forward. It's a good idea to hit this lever and do a reverse to lock the stitch, unless you're basting, which is just temporarily holding stitches in. If you're doing stitches you want to stick around, you're going to hit it with a quick reverse at the beginning. 1 stitch back, and then you just go forward again. Release the reverse and then go forward. We're keeping an eye on this. We're stitching forward. When we get to the end, same thing, quick reverse, and then back up. And this is really important. So see how our needle is plunged into the material right now? You might want to zoom in. We are going to lift it well out of the material, and not just that, but we're going to pay attention to this silver piece in here, and when that gets to the top position, that is how we know our stitch is completed. And then we can unclamp the fabric, pull it, and we'll have 2 separate lines again. And if we did that, that's a good sign. I'm going to show you what happens if you get that wrong, because that happens a lot. So if I just quickly do a few more stitches, hold my threads, do a little reverse and a forward, pull the needle up out of the fabric, but I leave it way down here. See that metal part just still being down there? And I try to lift it up. Ooh, I'm going to have a hard time pulling it. those threads are still sort of tangled down below. But if I lift it all the way, I can feel it freeing and see how a loop released itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to go find its friends. And then they're pulling freely again. So it's really important. It's less visible on some machines than others. On this machine, it's nice and visible where that top is. But you're going to want to make sure that's always in top position, fully extended position when you're releasing and cutting your threads. And then typically at the back of a stem, there is a cutter, and you can drag the threads over it and cut the threads, which is kind of a handy feature. So that's the basics of straight stitching. If you want to see how that works, what's making that bottom thread go is there's something called a bobbin. What a bobbin looks like is this. So it's this little cylinder where you you use the same thread typically for the bottom that you do for the top. It's a style thing. If you want to do it differently, you can. But typically you'd have the same thread in the top and the bottom, and you have to make your own bobbin. So I'm going to do a quick demo on how to make a bobbin in a second. But where those go is into this case at the bottom. So there is a bobbin, and then it fits into a case. This case went in like this. I'm just going to hold it upright. It went in like that, and it has a little door that opens, a little spring latch door. And what you want to do is drop your bobbin with the thread coming off the right side, and it's spinning clockwise. See that?
Mm-hmm.
So you are going to take that bobbin, drop it in the back, and then there's little, you kind of wind the thread around. So I kind of pulled it through there and up through there. Mm-hmm. And now my thread is sort of moving with tension, and I can pull it and it moves freely, but it's pulling from right there. So that means our bobbin's ready to go. And we're going to stick it back in the way it came from. I'm using the little lever door to hold it, get a nice grip on it, and I'm going to stick it back in till it clicks.
Yep.
And now we just have to pull that thread up. So see how our needle is threaded, but the bottom is hanging down below? We have to go down there and get it. So we're going to pull the wheel. This wheel over on the side is the hand motion for how to sew. When I'm not using a foot pedal and I'm using the hand wheel, I'm going to pull it toward me. Always pull it toward you. So I'm going to pull it toward me very gently. And then when I go all the way back up again, I can start pulling. And now we're in the top position again. That's important position. And look, we've pulled the bottom thread up. So now we've got our 2 threads. So that's how you know you're ready to go and ready to sew. You have your bobbin appropriately wound and fed into the machine. You've pulled that thread up. If on newer machines, there's a different mechanism for the bobbin where you literally just kind of drop the bobbin in, and that's an easier thing to figure out. So I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to tell you how it works in a old-timey machine. And then you can just, this is a piece that's typically removable on machines. It's so that if you were sewing a sleeve, you would have an easy way to fit the sleeve here and work on it without being such a big surface. So that's a pretty customary thing too. So that is how you sew. If you want to see what happens when you change the stitch width, if you wanted to do zigzags, for instance, I'm going to make it be like a 3. Again, I don't really know what the numbers mean. That's a 4. Here's what, when the stitch width stops being 0 and it starts being 4, here's what happens. Let's take a look. So now you can see the needles going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And if I lift it up and show you, top position, release my work, you get zigzags.
Awesome.
Yeah, and there are other stitches you can try. And my machine, they're pretty faded and hidden by the Post-it note my son made when he was little. But all you really need to worry about for basics are straight stitch, and then sometimes it's useful to do a zigzag. So for instance, if you had a frayed edge, you might want to zigzag across it just to stop it from fraying like that. You could decide to hit it with a zigzag.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's go over how it is that you thread the machine and then separately how you make a bobbin. So the way that you thread the machine, I think it's great to have a nice clean end on your thread. So I would snip the end to make it nice and clean and straight. That's going to simplify threading the needle. You want it, the thread pulling off of the back is the way that I've learned to do this. And then it's going to vary a little bit on different machines, so I'm not going to dive super into specifics. I'm just going to point out some important things. Some machines will even be numbered where you thread it, but basically there's going to be something holding it at the back of the machine. You're going to pull it through the tensioner. Remember how there were those numbers indicating the tension, the tightness of the thread?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to need to come past that. It's going to come down and go around some mechanism at the bottom and back up to the top and over that up and down mechanism that was so important to make arrive at the top before you try to release the thread.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone down, we've gone back up, and we're going back down again. And then there's going to be something that holds it close to the back of the machine. There's going to be something on the needle, or not on the needle yet, but sort of near the needle that's holding it onto that mechanism down below. And then you're going to actually thread the needle, which is why it was helpful to have a straight, clean end. And you're going to thread the needle. And I think it's helpful to kind of put my finger behind it without poking my finger behind it just to see where that hole is. Oops. And you can see I loosened it from here. And then you're going to pull it. And if you did it right, it should pull freely with some tension, but it should pull freely. So that is how you thread the machine. Next, we'll talk about how to make a bobbin. Okay, so here's how you thread a bobbin. You have to undo the threading from the machine, tighten it a little bit, or wrap it around so you don't have such a big tail. You're going to stick it on the sewing machine, and then it's different than the mechanisms that were for bringing the thread down. There's often some sort of cylindrical thing with some tension built into it that you're going to wrap it around.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to take an empty bobbin. If you don't have an empty one, you're going to want to maybe pull all the thread off of it, or I guess you can wind new thread on top of it if you want. I think it's helpful to use one of the little holes that are on this one to weave some of the thread through to the top. And then you're going to stick it on this little nub that's right here. Push it down. Hope you can see this. Snug it over. And then pull that wheel on the side out. So you might want to come over a little bit closer. So we have a bobbin on top that's been snugged over to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we've pulled this handle out.
Got it.
And now I'm holding this kind of tight. So my thread is going through the bobbin and out through one of those little holes. And I'm going to hold it tight to get it started and then use the foot pedal to start winding. And now I think it's safe to snip off this little tail. So I'm going to snip it and then I'm going to keep going.
Awesome.
And you can stop at any point, or it's going to sort of stop itself when it gets to hitting that point. So we won't play the entire tape, but I'll keep going and we'll fast forward for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure while it's going that it's kind of uniformly going up and down and up and down. It should be filling the bobbin nice and evenly.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, you can kind of nudge it a little bit. This one's a little And then when it gets to the end, it stops. And then you're like, oh, okay, we filled it up. We're good. And then you just snip it off. Oops. Snip it off. Snug it back this way. Push that handle, the cylindrical side wheel, in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you flipped back into regular stitching mode instead of bobbin winding mode. And now you have a bobbin. You pull it off. Takes a little work. Not sure why it takes so much work. There we go. And then you've got a bobbin wound and ready to go that you would put in your bobbin case in the way that we've already described. And then you have to wind your thread again. So it's a good opportunity to practice winding that thread and how that goes. So have fun. Happy sewing. So different machines will work a little bit differently. On this machine, for instance, you can see that there's a letter here indicated. Right now it says A, and A indicates a simple straight stitch where the needle's in the center of the presser foot. So there are other stitch options. One of them is just the straight stitch but a little nudged over, which could be useful in some closer hemming situations. But the main things basically stay the same. There's going to be a tension indicator that's here on this one, sort of how tight is the thread. This one is how long the stitch is. It sort of looks like lines in a road up here, or stitches. And so that is the indicator of how long the stitches are on this machine. You've got your same wheel on the side. There's the foot pedal. There's a bobbin hidden under here with a door. So similar concept, slightly different, but you'll figure it out.